It is officially the start of free agency today. Teams and players can begin negotiating at 6 p.m. What are the Pacers going to do? What have they already done? What is out there? What's the order of events going to be? We'll break it all down and get it planned for you on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today it is the day that many of you have been waiting for, free agency day, June 30th. Signings can start. I guess signings can't start. Agreements can be made. Players and teams can begin negotiating at 6 p.m. and the Pacers could be a busy team with lots of resources. If you want to hear more about those resources, Tuesday's episode about the Pacers cap space is for you. Today, though, we'll talk about what the Pacers did on Wednesday to set themselves up for free agency, some of the moves they made and did not make. We'll talk about some moves around the league that could impact the Pacers, what decisions they can make, what players they can pursue in free agency. And then at the end, we'll talk about all the big moves and the order of operations that will likely happen when free agency starts that will impact kind of how the Pacers are involved and what moves will be made around the league, because this stuff, the timing of it matters, what players are involved matters every single year. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. And let's just dive into what the Pacers did do on Wednesday. The 29th was the deadline for the Pacers to make some moves. In full disclosure, it's 11 p.m. The day's not over. I'm fairly confident that they're done doing their stuff for the day, though. The big one was Oshae Brissett's team option. I talked about this on Tuesday's show. I did a whole podcast on it back in May. Oshae Brissett had a team option this summer, and the decisions were fairly obvious to me. It was either pick it up and have him be on the minimum this season, or turn it down and have him go into restricted free agency. The Pacers made it official earlier today. They have picked up Oshae Brissett's team option for the 2022-23 season, and Oshae Brissett will now be an Indiana Pacer next season on a $1.8 million minimum contract. That is not what I expected to happen. So let's talk about this in general. First of all, his contract, despite it being picked up, is still non-guaranteed for the rest of the entire season. So not the whole season, until mid-January, when the league-wide cut-down date is. So if something goes horribly wrong, they can still cut him before that date and free up some cap money. Regardless, though, the Pacers picked up this option, and now Oshae Brissett will be an unrestricted free agent next summer. This was not the option I expected. I thought the Pacers were going to decline this option and send Oshae Brissett into restricted free agency this summer. And I'll sum it up again, even though I have on the last couple shows, in case this is your first time hearing about this. What the Pacers could have done is decline Oshae Brissett's team option on Wednesday, slide him a qualifying offer, and send him into restricted free agency, where they can negotiate with him on a longer-term deal at a more expensive number, but guarantee they keep him, because as a restricted free agent, they could have matched a deal he signed with another team. Now Oshae Brissett will still be on the Pacers this season at $1.8 million, very cheap. But next summer, he becomes an unrestricted free agent, meaning he can sign with any team. The Pacers don't have that match right. I thought, because the Pacers had a lot of flexibility this summer, they were going to decline the team option and renegotiate with him in restricted free agency. They opted to go another route. Not what I expected them to do. Again, I understood the merits of both sides, which was, again, why I did an entire podcast on this. But I still was a little surprised by this decision from the Pacers front office. So let's talk about this. First of all, him and the Oshae Brissett on the minimum is still fine, right? He's obviously good, and he could still be back. They're not allowed to not re-sign him next summer. They still could. He could still agree with them. He's just no longer. The Pacers can't guarantee he stays with the team. But could this mean something, right? Could this mean something about, whether the Pacers and Brissett really trust each other, whether the Pacers have something up their sleeves? When they do something I'm not expecting, sometimes I like to think this way. And this isn't to say that what they did is dumb and it could signal something else. They could just think Oshae Brissett's a minimum player and they will try to re-sign him next year, but it could just mean that they don't, they're not going to be crushed if they lose him next year. And that's totally a fine thing to think. He's a reserve forward, but I think he's good and merits some discussion to stay on the team. So that's why I was surprised. So what could it mean if it does mean something? I have two things I really think make some sense here. One is Had they done the route that I thought they would go, where they decline his team option, send him into restricted free agency, and then pay him, I don't know, 3 years, $18 million or something. So like $6 million a year. They would have lost about $4 million of cap space by doing that. And that's not that much money. But if they have a plan to do something really big or make a really big offer to a really good player or something like that, if they need to find a way to easily get $4 million to make that offer, hey, there you go. You just freed it up by not doing the route that I thought they would do with Brissett. So that is one option. I don't think that's what it is because there's not a lot out there that the Pacers would need that money for, and there are much cleaner ways to clean it up, to clear up that money. But that is a potential reason, is that the Pacers are headed towards a big move that requires a ton of cap space. And by having Brissett at a cheaper deal, it is much easier to get to, $25 million in space for the Pacers instead of 20 or 21. But had they just waited to re-sign him and structured the orders in the correct deal, his cap hold would have been low enough that that was still possible. Anyway, either way, that could be one line of thinking for the Pacers, albeit I don't think that's their line of thinking, but it is something there. But maybe they just have a really good relationship with Brissett, and they said, hey, we'll keep your number down this year, but next summer we'll have your full bird rights. We can pay you whatever you want. We can give you a 5-year deal, and nobody else can at that time. We'll just negotiate then. And Brissett, who did say he likes playing in Indiana and talked about his affinity for the franchise at his exit interview, could just think, yeah, I'll re-sign anyway next year if you want to keep me at that lower number. Now, he could obviously want more money now, but if they have a good relationship and trust, they can go into the season at that lower number and still get a deal done next season. And another part of this is that Brissett signed his deal in late April of 2021, which is a weird time because that season was a COVID-impacted season. The Pacers played basketball in May that year. It was pushed back a month. And that kind of messes with the NBA calendar. So let's describe how this affects Oshae Brissett. He signed a 3-year deal in late April. I think it was the 21st of 2021. And so 2- and 3-year deals, 3-year deals can be extended 2 years to the calendar date after they were originally signed. So in theory, that would mean that Brissett could not sign a contract extension until April 21st of 2023, which is after next season would, in theory, end for the Pacers if they don't make the playoffs. And at that point, he could just wait till free agency and see what offers are there. Why take an extension before free agency? But because that season was impacted by COVID, the NBA has sort of scaled the calendar back or changed it or altered it a little bit so that it's more reflective of a normal season. So Bobby Marks of ESPN reported today that Brissett is eligible for an extension, a contract extension, on March 15th of 2023. So about 3 weeks from the end of the season, as when he signed his original deal with the Pacers, his original 3-year deal with the Pacers. 3 weeks from the end of that 2020-21 season. So there's another factor here that I didn't know about because I didn't know about that COVID calendar change. Brissett could sign an extension if he's still on the team in March before the season ends. And then he doesn't hit free agency anyway. He still gets his pay bump, and the Pacers keep his cap hit down the season. Those are the reasons that I think they could have gone this route. They could have something big lined up. They could just really trust him. They could extend him this coming season. He might not get the free agency anyway, but I'm still surprised. I thought the Pacers would negotiate in restricted free agency. Not that they made a wrong choice. They just didn't make the choice that I personally would make if I was building the Pacers this summer. Either way, Oshae Brissett on the team this coming season, $1.8 million, non-guaranteed contract. He'll probably be in the rotation, so the non-guarantee part doesn't matter. But in terms of accounting, getting everything in order, I still thought I'd share that. The other deadline that's today, now it's 11:08 p.m., for the Pacers was qualifying offers to keep a guy in restricted free agency. Brissett would have gotten one if they wanted to make him a restricted free agent, but they couldn't because they picked up his team option. The other guys who were eligible would have been their 2-way players, Nate Hinton and Gabe York. I guess it's possible they get one within the next hour. I would assume, will not, just because there's not any real point to that for the Pacers. Those guys I don't think will be the Pacers' 2-way players next year. They didn't show very much for the Pacers last season. Maybe Nate Hinton. Rick Carlisle is a fan of his and has been dating back to his time in Dallas. And if they wanted to make him restricted and bring him back on another 2-way, I suppose I could have seen that. But my thought here is there's just really no point. And the Pacers have already signed 4 guys to Exhibit 10 deals, or at least reportedly are going to, which is more than typically done for training camp. Seems like those guys will be competing for 2-ways. So the Pacers haven't signed a 2-way yet. It is possible that Hinton and York are back, but they did not get a qualifying offer unless they get one in the next 51 minutes on the deadline day to receive one. They will now enter unrestricted free agency unless, again, I missed something within the last hour of the day. I think that was the expected outcome, but just for housekeeping reasons, that is looking like what is going to happen. So what happened not in Pacerland in the NBA day? Because this 29th deadline was not just one that impacted the Pacers. Most players with a team and player option had until this date to decide. A lot of guarantee dates were around this time. The qualifying offer deadline impacted every team. So there's a lot more clarity around what could happen in the NBA because of the stuff that happened on this day, not even in Pacerland. Let's talk about all that as it relates to the Pacers and some free agency targets that I think make sense for the Pacers or could wiggle free on the news front. Before we do that, though, I want to talk to you guys about Arcade 1UP. Boom shakalaka, I've got some big news to talk to you about. The one and only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1UP, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing you back the best arcade game ever, but they've made it bigger and better than ever with a Shaq Edition machine. You can jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire like you could in the old NBA Jams. And it's one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. It's back. There's no fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. You can just own the machine and compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. Arcade, the number 1up.com. For an estimated early September ship date, it's the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others, starting at just $3.99. And check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number 1up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Don't miss out. Go check them out, arcade1up.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, many choices, as it was a very busy, newsy Wednesday in the NBA. But of course, I will suggest Locked On Hawks. Brad Rowland can tell you all about the Atlanta Hawks being DeJounte Murray's new basketball team. Huge trade in the NBA landscape. Stunning to see the Spurs do something like that of all teams. But Greg Popovich and the Spurs typically do smart things, and maybe they're onto something with this sort of move. Let's talk about, speaking of that, only a little bit speaking of that, but speaking of that, what happened around the NBA on Wednesday that could have impact on the Pacers or could be something the Pacers should monitor as free agency opens up today. Qualifying offers were due, player options and team options, most of them were due. What is now available that wasn't, or the other way around? What could the Pacers be involved in? So I'm just going to run through some reports that I think have an impact on the Pacers and really the whole league and what it could mean for them as free agency opens. The first one is a league thing. The cap projected to be higher than the $122 million that the league originally estimated. It can only jump up 10% in a year. The NBA set that number for the rest of the CBA as a COVID provision. So the highest it can be is like $123.6 million. So it won't jump up that much, but it could be a little extra spending for the Pacers possibly in this free agency period, which is always good. But that helps every team in some way, whether that's the tax or the hard cap or whatever. And the Pacers, whatever line they end up dealing with, now have a little bit of extra wiggle room. That is the first bit of news. Not exciting, but still worth talking about. Let's talk about players, some decisions that were made, who reported it, what it could mean, and why I think that player is important to monitor from a Pacers perspective. First up, the most surprising one to me, Mo Bamba in Orlando. I talked about him a lot on the Pacers free agency center episodes in terms of centers that the Pacers could pursue if they decide to sign one. Mo Bamba in Orlando will not get a qualifying offer from the Magic Kobe Price of the Orlando Sentinel with that report. And they have Wendell Carter, and they have Banchero, and they have other bigs and forwards on their team like Jonathan Isaac and plenty of others. Robin Lopez was on that team last year. Sometimes I forget about that. Anyway, he's now an unrestricted free agent. Mo Bamba, maybe not the Pacers' number one target with guys like Isaiah Jackson and Goga Bitadze and Miles Turner on the team, but 24-year-old former top 10 picks don't just become available that often. If the Pacers can't keep Jalen Smith or they trade Miles Turner or a million things could happen, getting a former number 6 overall pick who really showed some flashes for Orlando last season could be a smart move for the Pacers. Good center, good defensive center, shot 38% from deep. If he is truly available and the Pacers have a needed center, that makes a lot of sense to me. And him being unrestricted makes it a lot easier. The Pacers historically have not liked to deal with restricted free agency, and now they don't have to if they want to pursue that guy. A lot of what I'm going to say in this segment is actually going to be about young guys who are now unrestricted free agents, because that is, I think, a lot of the biggest news for the Pacers. But all the rest of the guys are a little lesser level of players. So I'll hit another thing of big news that I think impacts the Pacers that's not about unrestricted or restricted free agency. Monte Morris. Why does Monte Morris affect the Pacers? The Nuggets and the Wizards agreed to a trade. Will Barton and Monte Morris will go from Denver to Washington. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Ish Smith will go from Washington to Denver. Win-win trade. Denver really needed a defensive wing. They get that in KCP. He can shoot it a little bit. They still have point guard depth by getting Ish Smith in the door. Washington gets Will Barton, who's a fine player, can play the 3 next to Bradley Beal, and gets Monte Morris. That's where the Pacers' impact comes in here. Monte Morris, very steady-handed point guard, can start on a lot of teams, doesn't require the ball to be supremely effective. A great fit next to a Bradley Beal type. And the Wizards get a guy. They get a point guard and an off-ball guard in Will Barton. They are almost certainly less interested in Malcolm Brogdon now. I think that's a big deal. They had interest in him in the draft. They drafted Johnny Davis, but they still had point guard needs, especially if they were going to cater to Bradley Beal's interests. Now that is very much less the case. And Brogdon's market is shrinking a little bit, right? A lot of the point guard moves have happened with Murray and Kyrie and now Monte Morris to the Wizards. There's not a ton of point guard needy teams out there at this stage. John Wall already on the move as well. I think a lot of Brogdon's value could now be to a team that views him potentially as an off-ball guard sort of player. And I think his value will probably be less than it was thought to be around the draft. And now that a lot of these moves have been made, it's not a timing thing for the Pacers. There's a lot of other moves that happened, and teams that needed point guards got better options or cheaper options for them. It's not that the Pacers waited too long. It's just that the valuations of other guys or the timings of moves never really made sense for them. So I still expect Brogdon to be traded myself, but I do not think the Wizards will be that team anymore. And I think that it will be more of a team that views him as an off-ball guard or a combo guard now that a lot of the point guard holes have been filled up. So let's go through some of these free agents that are now unrestricted and potentially could be a guy the Pacers get who makes sense for them given their position, their age, their former draft status, their potential, whatever. Besides Mo Bamba, there's Troy Brown. Troy Brown, former Chicago Bull, 15th overall pick in, I forget what draft that. Oh, they're all going to be 2018 draft guys. I don't need to look that up, but Troy Brown Jr., ex-Oregon Duck, ex-Washington Wizard, now an unrestricted free agent. He is only 22. He'll turn 23 in July, so it's not like before the season starts, his age won't be set. But quietly had some okay moments for the Bulls. Has shot 34% for his career from deep, decent rebounder, can handle the ball a tiny bit. Not like an awesome player, but getting a wing who's cheap and young seems like something that the Pacers should be all over in this free agency period. The next one, guy who actually is still a restricted free agent, and Spurs, look, who knows what's going on with them. But Lonnie Walker of the Spurs, Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report reported that he could leave San Antonio, and they still made him a restricted free agent. And I think that after trading away DeJounte Murray, it's possible they still keep Lonnie Walker. But again, as a former top 20 pick, good player, averaged over 11 points per game both of the last 2 seasons. And that's a quality player for, again, a team like the Pacers to snag. He's a guard, so maybe not the perfect fit. But again, rare that 23-year-old ex-top 20 picks become potentially available. So that's one to keep an eye on if you're the Pacers as well. Dante DiVincenzo, James Ham over in Sacramento reporting he will not get a qualifying offer. He is now an unrestricted free agent. He went 1 pick before Lonnie Walker in that 2018 draft. He's kind of more of a guard than a wing as well, but with 2 different teams with Milwaukee in 2020-21 and with the Kings to close out this last season, scored over 10 points per game, decent enough shooter and distributor and rebounder. He's like a decent player. He's a little older on the 25-year-old side, but right in the Pacers' age range, and now an unrestricted free agent, a potential option for Indiana to pursue as free agency rolls on. 2 more here, guys who maybe not were surprising, but are now unrestricted free agents. One is Kevin Knox, and look, Kevin Knox, not been good in his whole career. He's probably not more than a minimum player flyer at this stage after 4 pretty poor years. He went 9th overall in that 2018 draft, 6'7", never really popped with any team, has yet to shoot 40% on a season for any team. I don't think he's particularly an NBA player, but the Pacers desperately need forwards. He's only 22. He turns 23 in August on a 1-year kind of flyer deal. That's kind of what the Pacers should be looking for if they're going to continue to look towards success in future seasons. Maybe he doesn't pan out and they shoot themselves in the foot using resources on that. But the fact that he could be easily gotten at his age, at the position he plays, could make him a fit to slide in on this Pacers team. The last one is a good player who's not young, but is now an unrestricted free agent wing. That's Juan Toscano Anderson, the Warriors wing. Won a title with them this season, played in their rotation for much of the regular season, has played in a lot of playoff games for this team, was in the rotation for a lot of the playoffs this year. 14 games he played in this postseason run for Golden State. NBA champion, Juan Toscano Anderson. He's 29, not a ton of NBA miles on him, only 3 years of NBA experience, all with Golden State. Definitely took a step back this past season, but 36% three-point shooter for that Warriors team. Good defender, decent rebound type, because he can kind of shoot the three, not really well, but good enough. And he's pretty solid on defense, and he moves pretty well. Even at 29, I like the fit for the Pacers as a cheapo, unrestricted free agent wing that I didn't think would be easy to get, but the Warriors I get at their expensive level. I don't necessarily want to keep back guys like that. Most of the other names you'd expect to see on the restricted free agency front had happened what expected to them. Same with a lot of the player and team options. But those names to me, Lonnie Walker potentially leaving, and then Mo Bamba, Troy Brown, DiVincenzo, Toscano Anderson, and Kevin Knox becoming unrestricted. Those seem like the most natural targets to me for the Pacers. Second contract guys that could be gotten for cheap. And now their incumbent team does not have match rights. It could be very plausible for the Pacers to scoop them up in unrestricted free agency. They could offer, for some of those forwards, especially like if Troy Brown plays wing or Toscano Anderson or Kevin Knox, if they can offer minutes and a rotation spot, I mean, it could be pretty easy for the Pacers to get one of these guys in negotiation. So that's the big news, I think, around the league between that Washington trade, the cap space, and those players that the Pacers should be monitoring as free agency opens today. It's a big day for the Pacers. Who will they sign? What's going to happen? What's the order of events? How's this all going to go down? Look, it's here. The day is here. There's no more rumors to cover. There's no more random stuff to tie up and explain. It's time. What's going to happen in what order tonight? I don't know what player is going to what team, but I can explain how this all is going to probably look as someone who has studied and watched a lot of free agencies in these past periods. So let's break down what this day is going to look like tomorrow for the Pacers. Before we do that, though, let's talk really quickly about Sakara. Feeling your best starts with what you eat, and Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. Now is the best time to seek wellness, joy, and abundance in all areas of your life, starting with what you eat. And with Sakara, you get nutrient-dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish your body without ever sacrificing taste or quality. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine, on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants to give you the tools you need to transform your life with nutritionally designed, chef-crafted breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, all made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, and curb your sugar cravings. You got to try it yourself. Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockdown20 or enter the code lockdown20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockdown20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/lockdown20. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Hop on over to Locked On Nuggets with Matt Moore and Adam Mars as they break down that second biggest trade in the NBA yesterday, as the Nuggets get KCP, send out Will Barton and Monte Morris. Probably the best lineup. I like the way Adam Mars phrased it for Denver. The best lineup they've ever had around Jokic. If they can get Murray, Porter, KCP all in there with Jokic, that's as good as it's gotten for Denver around their superstar. So let's talk about free agency very holistically. Obviously, we're talking about free agency today, as podcasts do at these times. But we have reached the day, we have reached the time. All the Pacers-centric stuff has been covered. But what is set up for the Pacers tomorrow? What are they watching? How's this timing going to go for them? Because a lot of the big stuff for free agency sort of feels settled, right? I'm not going to pretend like all this stuff is going to happen exactly as I'm going to say. But the DeJounte Murray trade is done. He's going to Atlanta. Kyrie's going back to Brooklyn. James Harden opted out, but he's probably returning to Philly, almost certainly. Bradley Beal opted out. He's almost certainly returning to Washington. Zach LaVine's probably going to return to the Bulls. All the really, really big names that could have been on the move, seems like their home is obvious and settled already, right? And then the next tier of guys, that will be what happens first. That is where the Pacers' involvement in free agency you got to look at what these guys could be, right? That tier to me is 4 names that will sort of guide the market early on. So look, if you see signings right away when free agency starts, usually the teams that are making early moves either can't afford or aren't in the business of getting one of these big name players, right? And that could be the Pacers. They could be going for smaller, slower build moves, but they could, in theory, try to strike on a couple of these guys. So there's 4 guys that I consider the biggest stuff that isn't settled. And one of these guys is sort of settled. But anyway, I keep beating around the bush. That's Jalen Brunson, DeAndre Ayton, Miles Bridges, and John Collins. Brunson seems like he's going to the Knicks based on some of the moves they've made. They seem pretty confident. Seems like he'll take meetings with Dallas and Miami. Chris Haynes reported that. But a John Collins trade where Bridges goes, what deal he inks, DeAndre Ayton, same idea. What they do will be the early stuff to watch in free agency. And the Pacers could, in theory, be an Ayton team. That's been discussed a few times this summer. I did 2 podcasts on that, really, this offseason. If you want to go back and listen to the Centers free agency episode or the episode about DeAndre Ayton rumors from late May, that's your next stop after this episode. In theory, I could see the Pacers jumping in on those with their first early move. Now they're restricted free agents, so it would either take a sign and trade or a couple days but you can sign free agents to offer sheets pre-moratorium. So the Pacers would lock up their cap space, but they would have to wait to see and know if they got those guys if they made an offer on those restricted free agents. But that's the big stuff that'll happen early to me. That will sort of guide and hold back some signings, but for teams that are pursuing them and push forward some other teams that aren't pursuing them, right? So that's kind of why free agency is interesting. If you're the Pacers and you think you can get one of those guys, you're either pretty confident or fairly confident, whatever, maybe you go for them. But while you're chasing the big names, if you're a team that's on the fringe of maybe getting them, maybe not, all the lesser guys that you think you could have gotten to build on your team will be doing what they can to get signed as early as possible. You got to make these decisions in short instances all the time. So how the Pacers kind of navigate early free agency will be dictated by their interest in those guys. I think they will sort of be the first wave of big news that is settled early in free agency. The second tier stuff, Colin Sexton and Anthony Simons are the only 2 guys I really have there. Seems like they'll probably return to their incumbent teams. Maybe Sexton is on the move on a very guard-heavy Cavs team already. But that's kind of the big stuff that will have to settle down, because for the Pacers, I mean, yes, maybe they end up with one of the 6 names I've said that doesn't feel settled between Ayton, Bridges, Brunson, Collins, Sexton, and Simons. I suppose it's possible the Pacers get one of those guys, though I don't personally expect it. It is possible. But after those players, the drop in the free agents market in terms of impact is enormous. It's huge. It becomes, vets who can help contenders. Sure, it becomes, Malik Monk is like near the top after that group of like, maybe this guy's a decent starter or a high-level rotation player, but you're really taking a drop after that. And that's where the Pacers heat up, I think, a ton, because Brogdon's better than any free agent at that point. His trade market will heat up on teams that strike out. Any other key vets that could be on the move, like Buddy Hield or Miles Turner, their market would, in theory, heat up at that time. And the Pacers themselves, who have some roster spots to chase players, could, in theory, start affording everyone left on the board at that point. So that's sort of the order on how this will go. I think those 6 guys will sort of, if a team is interested in them, they might not make any early moves until they're able to, meet with that guy or try to sign or trade for, in John Collins' case, that guy. And then some of the lesser players could be on the move. That is when the Pacers, to me, will kind of strike, is after that tier of 6 guys. If the Pacers are involved, sure, maybe not. But once that's done, I think the Pacers will get their names. They might make their trades, and they will begin to shape their team. That's sort of how these free agency periods typically go as these go. Like the Ricky Rubio sign and trade, if that becomes a sign and trade, or any TJ Warren deal, seems like it'll happen after those 6 names. For example, they won't be the first things that happen unless the Pacers are sending them away, and those trades have been agreed to early in the free agency period. But that would never happen. That would be illegal. That would be tampering, which teams never do, of course. Now, the other thing to watch with the Pacers and how they're set up for free agency beginning later today, the market has kind of changed for Brogdon. So his trades might look a little different, which if it's an off-ball guard kind of thing, different teams could chase him. Trades could look different. In general, the order of operations will stay the same, but the teams interested in him, if the point guard market becomes saturated or filled up, could look a little different. That could sort of impact how things go, I suppose. But that's just me thinking about what his trade market looks like and where he fits into this free agency landscape. I'm of the belief that, again, I've said this already on the show, he will still be traded, but I think it would be to a team that either strikes out on the free agents they pursue, or they feel like he's the answer at point guard, and there's not a lot of teams left in that second boat. So it seems like a team that wants a guard, wants a ball handler, wants a shooter, or all three, and says, hey, Malcolm Brogdon could be that guy for us. We didn't get the signings that we wanted in free agency. Perhaps that could happen. Perhaps he could be in a trade that is a massive salary dump and they recoup a bunch of assets that way. I don't know, but it would sort of be a tier 3 move. And all this stuff will happen so fast, it won't feel like a tier 3 move. But free agency is crazy, and we'll, of course, cover all the moves that relate to the Pacers, that the Pacers do on the Locked On Pacers podcast. We'll have a very special guest tomorrow. Many of you will remember him fondly as one of the former hosts of this podcast. Should be very fun as we dive into the signings and moves made around the league that impact the Pacers and will guide them forward into year 2 of the Tyrese Halliburton era. You won't want to miss it. We'll be here on Locked On Pacers breaking it down. Everybody have a great day. Hope you enjoy free agency to the extent that you actually enjoy free agency. I am excited for it to be over. So thank you for listening, everybody. Hope you have a great day, and we will, of course, see you tomorrow.